Reuben, Sophie, thank you so much for the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. Another Body is an incredible film, heart-wrenching and certainly timely. Um, how did you get involved with Taylor's story?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Firstly, means a lot to know when it connects with people. So Ruben was researching 4chan and the alt-right communities and came across deepfakes and and instantly like saw the potential for this and the potential for this to be a kind of violence against women issue. Got in touch with me, and we both just saw from the very beginning that this one had the potential to cause enormous damage, but two, like, wasn't being represented. The reality on the ground was so much worse and different from what was being talked about in the media. Like when it did hit the media the first time, it was all about threats to geopolitics, threats to democracy and political instability. And we saw, based on these horrible threads, that it really was acting as a violence against women issue, and that women were being targeted. And I think that from the very beginning, we felt really like, what's the word? Propelled to do something about it, propelled to tell the story. We saw the absolute lack of survivor voices like in the public conversation, and also like really wanted to approach this both as filmmakers and activists, and having both of those two things really happening alongside each other. And I think it would be impossible for either of us, like in terms of the way that we approach storytelling, to just quote unquote tell the story. And it felt like there was so much more that we wanted to do around this issue, which we have done, and the kind of storytelling and Taylor's work has been, Taylor's voice has been such a core part of that.
It really is remarkable, and I mean, certainly, just on the topic of AI right now. I mean, it's this everybody's talking about it. It's burst forth this year in a reality, and we see everything from people making Johnny Cash sing Taylor Swift songs, or see Tom Cruise be in Terminator, or so. All of these things are happening. I was wondering, for you both, what are we missing? What are we missing in this conversation? Because obviously this is focused on Taylor's story, but to pull it back a little bit before we focus on her, but what are we missing when we're not talking about AI to you?
Well, I think the thing that we're really, really missing is patience. These companies are like racing ahead to kind of be the dominant company in AI. And I think the upshot of that is that there's not enough time is being taken to sort of consider the implications of everything that is being done. In the same way that we didn't sort of legislate social media companies when they came about. They were too new and they were racing to sort of, again, be the dominant companies. And we really established some pretty pernicious practices in the way that we interact with our phones. And this is the next paradigmatic shift in the way that we live our lives due to technology in the last 10 years, with the potential to be so much worse. We're at a point where AI is so poorly understood by the general public and by policymakers. And there's no way that we can really put proper protections in place to ensure that AI ends up being something which largely benefits society rather than causes a huge amount of harm. AI is, there are so many distinctions between it. We have had AI as part of our lives for the last 5-10 years, even if we don't realize it. But these like new forms of like ChatGPT and AI image generation AIs is what really caught the public's attention, and why so much attention is being paid to it right now. Deepfake technology is an AI. It's an adversarial AI, which is like different from like large language models like ChatGPT, and it comes with its own ethical complications and own potential harms and risks. But we really have to sort of like individuate the different parts of AI, these new technologies which are growing, and sort of assess each one with thought and care and real consideration of what the impacts on society might be, and ensure protections are in place to ensure sort of public safety.
Yeah. I think for me, it's like really important for us to understand AI a bit better. And like, obviously, we've been looking into this for a while now, but we're still getting to grips with it. And I think that we all are, but we do need to understand um, the difference between some of the models that Rubens expressed and like kind of demystify it's an algorithm, it's got a specific purpose. So you know, even like the really big algorithms, large language models, they're predicting what the next word is based on previous examples. It's all based on previous examples, based on the data set, predictive technology. So the actual thing itself isn't the scary thing, it's the way in which it might be used and the scale of the data that's being fed to it and how much we trust it and how much we give of ourselves. And so we're really passionate about like splitting off things like, you know, ChatGPT, which has scraped like hundreds of millions of words from across the internet, where there's issues about consent, issues about ownership, issues about rights. And then also, if we're using that to like write essays, to do this, to do that, like that's really concerning. And what that could do in terms of how information is being disseminated is a huge revolution. However, with the case of deepfakes, and especially deepfaking Taylor, you know, in our case, every single image that went into the source data set and then the face file data set that was put on top of Taylor's face to protect her was generated with consent. And that application, that AI cannot do anything other than make the deepfake that we'd asked of it. So the ethical question there is really not about, we don't really believe that there is an ethical question there because consent was generated at every point of the process. It doesn't have existential threats. So yeah, we really, really need to like all educate ourselves way more so that we can separate the really scary stuff from the not so scary stuff and not be in a moral panic mentality.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, the last Indiana Jones film had Harrison Ford de-aged 40 years, but that was part of his it's certainly, I'm forgive me for the comparison, but it's consented. It's sort of like, yes, this is part of what this particular film calls for, but you know what we see now is the relationship to the image since the internet took over, I guess now roughly 25 years ago. Our relationship to the image has shifted,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating and terrifying because it feels like we think we own the rights to
Yeah.
another person's image just because we've done something with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And listening to this story with Taylor is absolutely a gut punch.
And I think that one of the things that AI does is that because it's so powerful as a tool, it's accelerating conversations that were already there.
Mm.
So because now you can scan someone's face and then that could be used as a data set to be applied, you know, forever, infinitely. So that's so powerful. And it's not necessarily the scanning of the face that's the problem, because if that's done within a really like boundaried framework and within consent, that's fine. But it's the potential for us, we just don't have frameworks around that. And I think, as you say, it's like forcing us to have this deeper question, which we should have already been having with social media, as Reuben mentioned, and we should have already been having in many other contexts around what is our digital identity? What is our digital image? Do we have rights and ownership over that? And the way that, you know, the internet has been constructed in many ways for good reasons, because we have memes, we have image sharing, we have the proliferation of images and the fact that we can all screen grab again and again and again, and no one would want to like dampen that like incredible capacity and virality and all of that. But you know, fundamentally, when someone's image is being attacked in the way that Taylor's is, like we really need to create like a fundamental situation of rights over that.
And totally, I mean, I will just like clarify, at least from my perspective, we're not, you know, I still think there's the right to sort of like satire and parody with deepfake technology where consent isn't maybe necessary, but it really depends on a case by case basis. Like if you were intending to violate someone without their consent, it's a very big issue. But you know, deepfake technology, as long as it's correctly labeled as a deepfake, it's like very evidently like satire, then that is, you know, there's no ethical issue with that. It's just a new form of doing old, you know, satire cartoons. But with it's very important that it's how it's being presented to the public is really clear or like obvious, and so it's not being used as like misinformation. It's just being used for its as it's only being used in a way which is intended to, in a way that doesn't sort of cause damage to someone's reputation or emotional well-being or physical well-being. Yeah.
You know, and you say physical well-being. I think this is one of the things that's most fascinating about this particular story is you see the relationship with the judicial system. You see the relationship with the police. And so you have this young woman who has had her face put on another young woman, and it's now irrelevant whether or not that other young woman has been consensual in these sexual acts, is because Taylor's face is now on top of them. And the police are saying, well, it wasn't you, you know?
Yeah.
It and it 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 is just absolutely heart-wrenching to hear her tell her story in that regard. And I guess this is one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, what is that tension? What is that tension between the, because they're not, and I'm using air quotes here, breaking any laws. I'm not not trying to use any filters on my on my Zoom. It was a
Technology
celebration
fighting
all of a
back,
sudden.
you know.
All of a sudden the confetti falls. That's the opposite point I'm trying to make. That was terrible timing. But I mean, they're not quote unquote breaking any laws, but they are violating Taylor and her, and she's not the only one. What do we do about this?
Well, that's why we do believe that there needs to be a deepfake law, because law enforcement are never going to do anything. Police are never going to do anything if there's not a law in the book saying that this is unacceptable content. And also, we need to draw like a cultural line in the sand and say to the next generation of young men, like, this is illegal content. You should not be watching it. You should not be sending it to your friends, because it's being normalized right now. There are 14 million people a month going on the biggest deepfake porn websites, and lots of them maybe aren't even necessarily aware. When we've been, aware that this, how abusive this is, and aware of the cost to women in society, like in our research and talking about this to people, people have admitted that they watch it. People have been like, it's not really a big deal. We hear that, not a lot, but a fair amount, And so that is essential. Plus, this is about misogyny. And even if it's not illegal content, it's about, we would expect the police to be respectful enough of women's agency and identity and consent, that they would at least be a supportive presence at the end of the phone. And that's obviously the furthest thing from the truth. Like, every person we've spoken to, we haven't spoken to a single person that's had a good experience with the police, literally not one. And the minimization and the victim blaming is kind of absolutely everywhere. And I think we also thought that deepfakes were going to stop the victim, or we're going to reveal the victim blaming for what it is, because Taylor, you cannot build any kind of argument that she called this upon herself in any way, shape, or form. She was completely oblivious to any of these practices. But also, that's when it does still come down to consent, because even if she'd been a sex worker, even if she'd sent, nude images to Mike, none of that makes it justifiable, makes it okay. So we really need to educate around consent in our society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things I love about this film is Taylor herself, because she's such a strong young woman in so many ways, and having been, beaten down and so many ways, and continuing to try and solve this herself in so many ways. But there's a wonderful line that is said in the film. I wanted to hear what you thought of it. It's, shame is a form of silencing you. And I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Certainly. I mean, one of the things we really wanted to explore in this film is how deepfakes and all sorts of online gendered harassment against women online has this effect where women withdraw from participating in the online space on social media, and that sort of results in women being fearful of pursuing careers in politics and journalism or the entertainment industry, because they know that by being in the public eye, they're going to be harassed for it. It's just the reality of the situation. And historically, sex has always been a weapon used to sort of shame women, and so deepfakes is just the newest tool to do that. And we think that that's why it's so powerful for someone like Taylor to tell her story, because she's refused to be silenced by this. She refused to be shamed by it, and she's given so much of herself to this project to get the word out there, to try and change the landscape, and not just allow us to sort of sit back and allow these sort of bad actors on the internet to prevent half of our population from freely participating in on online forums.
And thinking about it from another perspective, like thinking about the motivations behind what we can read from what people are saying on these forums, and it's actually a really complex picture because it's not only the kind of quote unquote revenge porn stereotype of people being spurned and therefore trying to target someone. Like it does seem that there is this like vitriolic, like aggressive intent because people post people's location. There's like pile on harassment, trying to get multiple people to contact one person. Whatever people say their motivation is, like that is violent and that is unbelievably aggressive. But there was also on these forums this real just sense of entitlement over female bodies and sense of ownership. And actually sometimes it's quite complex because sometimes it's almost like a parasocial relationship going on where it's like a celebrity and they feel kind of connected or identified, or they're part of the tribe of that ASMR artist. Like some of the people that target GB, they almost like venerate her, adore her, maybe feel sexually attracted to her. And so it's a real complex mix of different things going on. But the thing that does unite all of it is entitlement, like and specifically male entitlement over female bodies. And these communities online are allowing that sentiment to fester in ways that I think are really, really worrying, because it feels like Me Too has done an incredible, has opened the doors in so many ways for women to speak out about their experiences. And that felt like such a paradigm shift. But these are pockets in a way of resistance to that. And they're trying to, put those voices back in the box, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. When we hear these stories and you just hear this, there's this aggressive, almost rage. And this is why I go back to the idea of our relationship to the image, because I think, for the last 25 years, we've just sort of said, I made it, I own it. And it doesn't matter if it's another celebrity or if it's someone or something. You can take an image and you put it, and all of a sudden it's somehow different. We've separated the person from the image.
Mm.
And we hear that in this film with Taylor's story. Is it sort of like, yeah, well, she ticked me off, and so I'm taking her face, essentially, and it's, oh my gosh, it gets me upset, gets me really mad.
Thing of like, you can't really, it's hard to generalize too much about the people on these forums, because what we've also found is that it's not the people that you would expect. It's not only some like sad person living in a basement with no job and no prospects, etc. As Danielle Citron says in the film, it's like the mayor of a small town in Denmark. It's a professor. It's a teacher. It's it's a much wider group of people than you think. But it's an unbelievably cowardly way to target someone, and it's because and it's hidden and it's behind closed doors and at very little risk to yourself because you're anonymous and you can use a VPN and things like that. And so I think that in a way that heartens me, because maybe in another era, in another time, Mike wouldn't have had this would have had to try a different tactic to harm Taylor. But what really sticks is that if we could shut down these sites, if we as society weren't upholding and aiding and abetting this abusive practice, I would think this is a great sign that all of the horrendous people of the world haven't really got any, what's Mike going to do in the real world? You know what I mean? Like, what can you do? Like, give us all you've got. But the fact that we are creating an internet landscape, but because Pornhub isn't taking this seriously, because Google is literally driving traffic to these sites, because these sites and these communities are growing and thriving, it's just giving this whole new generation the capacity to harm women in a new way.
It's unbelievable and it's heartbreaking. And I know we're out of time, but I'm so grateful for the chance to speak to you both. This is a really important issue and a really important film, and I thank you so much, Reuben and Sophie, for the chance to chat with you about it.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank you so much,
much.
Steve. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate your like allyship on this subject. Really, it means the world.
I appreciate that too. Thank you. That means a lot. Have a great day.